Ladies and gentlemen, how are you? Wei Ko from Revolution here with Chris Grainger, CEO of IWC. How are you, sir?
Very good. How are you, Wei?
I'm very well, sir. And thank you so much for inviting me to this momentous occasion.
So, it's our pleasure.
It's a complete new Portuguese. And, you know, it's a pretty daunting undertaking because this is one of the most beloved men's dress watches of all time. I mean, were you intimidated at all by approaching this?
Always. Like when you think about as a brand, in your collection, it's sort of a range of things you can do between where I think you are in the timeless core section of your DNA all the way to maybe the more playful, sportier sides of your collection, where I think that idea of reinvention and innovation comes in a lot more visibly than when you take it back to the core of who you are. And the Portuguese, as you mentioned, is exactly that. It is our DNA dress watch dating all the way back to 1939 with a history in the DNA of a marine chronometer. And the original Portuguese being that marine chronometer precision wristwatch that was originally shipped to Portugal to the two gentlemen you just referred to. And of course, since then, you have a responsibility to that DNA. So when you evolve a Portuguese, it is really about evolving and optimizing every single element of that collection while visually never changing anything noticeably. And as you say, it's not only daunting, but it's also one of the hardest tasks because any sports watch, new shape, new case, new color, new materials, new partnership activation around it, it's very easy to make that differentiator. And Portuguese to the point that when we actually were totally there with the Portuguese automatic 42 design, you see them, you almost feel like, yeah, of course, it's just the Portuguese automatic 42. And then you have them side by side and you think, hang on a minute, this is different, that's different, the dial is completely... But the DNA and the effect, the recognizability, the familiarity is still there. You just feel there's an upgrade. And this is the hardest balance to strike, right? Because it's invention without changing the core DNA of it and without changing too much visually at the same time.
And Chris, you know, I'm in my mid-50s now, although I'm getting married this year, so as you
Congratulations.
can see, my hugely courageous guy. No,
yeah,
I have to say I'm very, very lucky. I have a wonderful fiance, babe. If you're watching
Absolutely.
this, I love you so much.
Shameless plug.
Exactly. However, because I'm a middle-aged man, like, you know, I'm a little...
Is this the moment where I also have to point out that I love my wife and children very much?
No, he was just incidentally just telling me that. So Mrs. Grainger, wherever you are, Chris was just telling me how much he adores both you and your children. The point being, however, is that, you know, you can become a bit of a grumpy old guy when you get to my age, right? And you become very hesitant about change, right?
Yeah.
So when I heard there was a new Portuguese family coming out, I'm like, but do they need to change it? I like it the way it is, you know? And then when I looked at the watch, I'm like, oh, I do really like that. And what I was really, you know, kind of like seduced by, I guess, was the idea of a very subtle but completely radical change that we have here. So, you know, you talked about making the watches lighter. I love this sort of dynamic contrast I feel about making the layout of the dials a little bit more minimalistic, a little bit more instrument-like, as you say, but massively increasing the visual richness of the watches, like this crazy 60-step process dial, which apparently 15 steps of which is lacquer. I mean, tell me about how these visual cues make the watch much more appealing.
You're right, it's exactly that. I think we took back the dial design and said, okay, let's base this back on, all the way back in history, you have marine observation deck watches, which were used by Royal Naval officers on deck for, you know, organizing their watches and timekeeping and navigation, of course. And there is a clarity and a lightness in those dials where every single detail is purposeful. So there's no decoration on these dials. And I think this is something that when you look at, especially at the PPC layout, and I'll just take this one for a minute here. Really, when you think about the way the dial is organized, you have a sharpness and a legibility in the displays, which are really instrument DNA. But at the same time, we've given them a lightness, a luxury, a refinement that makes it not a sports watch, not a pure tool watch. And that is, again, a really critical balance to strike. So when you look at the automatic 42, for example, we've taken away some of the very bold red detailing from the previous version. Some of the boldness in the type actually much reduced, worked on really the structuring of the sub-counters, the structuring of the print, to give that a visual lightness that makes it look timeless and luxurious. And at the same time, when you look at the moon phase, you know, we used to have some of our perpetual calendars with the single moon with the poetic stars. We had a double moon that had stars around the double moon disk. Now we're back to really this sharp cigar cutter double moon, which is very IWC, very on DNA, and just is much more on point with that instrument character compared to something which maybe is more classical timekeeping. And that's really the differentiation we wanted to make. And then, as you said, what I admire so much in this dial making process is how much of an intricate artisanal process that actually is. You mentioned it, 60 steps. It starts from the blank with that Soleil sunray finish, then you have the PVD color coating on top, and after that you're applying 15 layers of clear lacquer, of varnish, to give that depth, that gloss. Before you then start the tampo printing, you start setting all the individual appliques, and it's just a small work of art that you will find in the end in 42, 44 millimeters with 60 process steps, an infinite amount of components and love and work that goes into that. And ultimately, I think in a Portuguese, this is the profoundness that you appreciate wearing a product like that every single day. There's always new details, new elements to be discovered, but it's not in your face. It doesn't shout at you. It's not an immediate effect watch. It grows on you and grows on you and grows on you. And that's also what we've done when it comes to the colorways. Again, it is colors that are different and that are fresh and that bring something, but that you don't grow tired of after 2 weeks. This was super important to me. The horizon blue, the ice blue, I really wore for extended periods just around the house and the office to see if you're getting something which on the one hand is sort of fresh and very unseen in Portuguese, but on the other hand has a longevity to it where you didn't feel after a couple of days, okay, no, I've seen it now, I want to move on to something else. And that's always that Portuguese balance. You see in the automatic 40 as well, the side profile has been greatly reduced in that white gold case. We have a double box glass construction. The opening of the dial is bigger, the opening of the case back is bigger, because now even the engraving around the rotor, around the movement, is fully opened up by that sapphire on the back. So in the end, you get that typical proportion of a Portuguese, but it is actually lighter and just that much more refined on the wrist than the previous model.
It's really cool because what you've done really expresses the DNA of the Portuguese so well, which it's a completely unique watch, right?
Yeah.
On first glance, you look at it and you're like, it's a men's dress watch. But it's not, because it's a men's dress watch, and this was how it was commissioned by the two gentlemen from Portugal, Rodrigo and Teixeira,
yes.
right? That they wanted a men's dress watch that had all of the performance characteristics of a marine chronometer, right? A watch that they put on their wrist and they could actually use as a marine chronometer, which is extraordinary, and which gives it a uniqueness, because underlying that beauty and that dress watch needs to have a pragmatism and a performance ability and a precision, as you were saying, and that's really well articulated in these watches. But if we're going to talk about precision, we have to talk about this incredible eternal calendar.
Absolutely.
Talk to me about this watch, Chris.
Absolutely. So we have a long history in perpetual calendars at IWC. Kurt Klaus famously invented our program wheel perpetual calendar back in 1985. And the perpetual calendar was ingenious because it doesn't use a huge section of different gears and levers to actually program the leap year every 4 years in the perpetual calendars. It's done with a single program wheel with different indentations, meaning that the calendar is fully synchronized and adjustable via a single crown on the side of the case, which made that perpetual calendar very unique. But, of course, being engineers, we just didn't want to stop there.
Right.
And there is one flaw with that basic perpetual calendar concept of 1, 2, 3 leap year, and that is the fact that our Gregorian calendar, which has been adopted almost all over the world, starting in the sort of 1580s when Pope Gregor invented this type of calendar. And incidentally, I read there were 2 Swiss villages in the canton of Graubünden which adopted the calendar much later than everywhere else. Typical. Sure. I'm surprised it wasn't Schaffhausen, to be honest. Apparently not. And here you are. So the point of the Gregorian calendar is that to keep the calendar in sync with the actual solar year, a couple of leap years have to be omitted. So in a 400-year cycle, there should be 100 leap years, but according to the Gregorian calendar, there's only 97. So 3 leap years are being skipped, meaning that the years 2100, 2200 and 2300 do in fact not have a leap year to compensate for the solar year, which is slightly longer than 365 days. And for the first time, our engineers and watchmakers have actually cracked this irregularity and programmed a mechanism that is actually visible from the front through the sapphire dial here, where we have overlaid gears which actually make the correction between the 4-year wheel, which basically goes around once every 4 years, indicating the leap year, driving a 5-side Maltese wheel, which translates the 4-year wheel onto a 400-year wheel. And the overlaying of the 4-year and the 400 wheel with different indentations allows the actual mechanism to probe at every single leap year whether this should be a leap year or shouldn't be a leap year.
That's great.
And in the 400-year wheel, with just one rotation only in 400 years, so
that's because you're putting the leap year back in.
Less than 1 degree per year,
right.
There is 3 special indentations which will tell the mechanism to skip the particular leap year in 2100, 200 and 300.
And put it back in.
And therefore,
right.
This runs correctly all the way, and this is the bit that I find really fascinating. It runs correctly all the way to the end of the calendar, which is 3999, after which our calendar is no longer defined for the year 4000.
So no one's sure whether or not that's going to have a leap year or not.
Yeah.
Okay,
which is slightly worrying, but so for the foreseeable perpetual future, this is programmed correctly.
That's incredible. Now, but I love the fact that it's a secular perpetual calendar.
Yeah.
So yes, it compensates for the 4-year cycle of leap years. Then every 100 years it omits it, but then every 400 years it puts it back in. And this is going to happen in perpetuity until 3999 midnight.
Yeah, when we finish.
And when we finish.
The millennium bug will be nothing by comparison.
Exactly. And then whatever happens there, whether there's a leap year or not a leap year, I'm sure the IWC will have figured it out by then.
Yeah.
And I find that to be incredible. But that's not all, right?
Because
that's not all. Let's talk about in 85 when you guys did the first perpetual calendar, the moon phase indicator was accurate to 122 years.
Correct.
A deviation one day within 122 years. Then you did a new version of that and became 577.
Yeah.
But Chris, how accurate is the moon phase indicator here?
Yeah, so this one here is the absolute next step. I give you the headline figure. This moon phase will deviate by 24 hours, one day only after 45 million years. So it's quite a step from 577 to 45 million years. See,
that's incredible.
I think the briefing to our engineers was slightly different. They overshot the brief marginally.
Right.
It's a little bit like, we had the shock absorber back in the day with 30,000 G. And I said, guys, you were supposed to make it shockproof, not to, But here we are, typical sort of IWC
If I'm not mistaken, the previous record was 2 million,
yeah,
right?
The current Guinness World Record is 2 million. We have now applied to have our record officially recognized at 45
I think I know
years.
the guy who used to hold that record. I think we should call him together later tonight. We should call him together later tonight. Yeah, I think it'll
absolutely.
be fun.
Yeah, well, send a bottle probably. Absolutely. So the way that worked, you spoke to it. So obviously the basic problem is that the lunation, the lunar rotation is not 30 days, but 29 days, 12 hours. And 44 minutes and 2.88 seconds.
Yes.
And depending on how many gears you put into the movement, at what kind of gear ratio, you will get closer and closer to that magical number and make the moon more and more correct. So from the 122 years you mentioned to 577, it is just having more space in the movement and having a bigger gear ratio to compensate more precisely. What we've done here is we've basically used the modern power of supercomputing and said we would like to add 3 additional gears with 100 teeth maximum each. Please work out the best possible ratio combination. And then a supercomputer crunched the numbers for weeks on end, checking 23 trillion possible combinations.
Wow.
And coming up with about 100 options for our engineers to choose from of a best possible combination of gear size, position and teeth. And in the end, that gives you the 45 million year accuracy. And also it means that you are in a gear precision area where you cannot machine the gears any longer. They have to be done by photolithography, which is basically the computer chip semiconductor, a photographic galvanic process whereby you have nickel phosphor gears which are grown in this photolithography, because that's the only way to get to that
level of precision.
2 micrometer precision of gear, finishing of the teeth and teeth precision to even make that mechanism
But
run.
that's really cool, because you're mentioning there's only 3 additional wheels for this rather amazing achievement in terms of moon phase accuracy. And then there's, I think altogether there's only 7 or 8 more wheels for the 8 more wheels for the Gregorian.
Yes.
So actually, because I have heard of secular perpetual calendars before, but usually they're hyper complicated in terms of the trains that they have, right? So sticking to IWC's philosophy, which is let's not only make it better, let's make it smarter, right?
Yeah, make it simpler and more robust, and as robust as we possibly can.
Yes.
Reducing moving parts and making sure we're taking just a completely different approach, because in classical watchmaking, as you alluded to, there's a ton of gears and very beautifully designed levers that make up that mechanism. We actually use program wheels that are overlaid, that use the Maltese teeth technology to have a much slower turning gear and to get to this extreme ratio from 4 years to 400 years via 3 wheels only that are overlaying, and that overlay of indentations creates the correct programming for the calendar to know whether it's a leap year or not. So what I love about it, as you mentioned, is just the simplicity of it. It's all in that space of the little aperture there on the dial. That's all it is.
That's incredible.
It doesn't take 15 different cogwheels to make that happen.
I mean, that's the key of IWC's complications, right? Whether it's the split-second chronograph, whether it's a minute repeater, whether it's a perpetual calendar, it's functional and it's robust. I mean, I remember back in the day, again, because I'm really old, I bought a GST titanium perpetual calendar. And this was
cool watch, by the way.
a perpetual calendar that was made to be a sports watch, right? I mean, it's unheard of in the time.
Exactly.
And that's how much faith IWC had in the robustness of its watches. Okay, but this watch is also stunning from a design perspective, right? So I know Christian Knoop was mentioning this was kind of like the halo watch, and a lot of the design codes then kind of made into the rest of the watch. But this has got a very unique dial that's actually made of glass. Talk to me about why you guys decided to do that, and why it's got this crazy three-dimensional chapter ring on the side of it.
Well, fundamentally, when you make an eternal calendar, the watch has to last visually as well. Now, we know that a brass dial, at some point, corrosion will get the better of it. This may be a few generations. We don't really know. Watchmaking's only been around for X hundred years. But here, of course, glass is a much more permanent material. And we wanted to achieve 2 things here. One is visual lightness, crispness, clarity, and the other is also a finishing on the dial that will basically last. So this frosted and back painted glass dial will actually obviously maintain its look for the foreseeable future. It will not patina over time, it will not corrode over time, and that was really the 2 main decision points why we opted for glass here. And I think the effect of the depth you're getting from it and looking into the multi-layers of the moon phase, that's really why it is such a great choice. And then you've got the double box glass, you've got that Reo you mentioned, which is actually completely curved, you've got the tempo printing of the outer scale that actually sits on that curve, and it just makes it visually so much more interesting than going for that flat dial configuration. So again, not easy from an engineering challenge, because especially both the box glass and the glass dial, they have to be machined to exactly the same thickness at every point of the radius to give you even light reflections and no distortion. So complicated process, but in the end, I actually saw this watch finished assembled myself the first time today, so it's just, I was so relieved. It's everything I hoped for and more in terms of effect, so it's
incredible.
Really
and I would encourage any person that gets the opportunity to hold this watch in their hand, it's great because you look at it like that and you're like, wow, that's great. And then you just turn it slightly at an angle and you realize how incredibly complex this multi-level display in glass has been. And then you get also this incredible effect of this curved chapter ring at the perimeter of the dial, which follows precisely the radius of the sapphire crystal above it, which is breathtaking, honestly. I mean, that's an awesome watch. Okay, I want to talk to you, because we've talked about the different references here. We've got 42mm automatic, we've got 40 automatic, we've got the chronograph in 40 as well, and we have also in the Obsidian execution, a tourbillon with a day and night indicator. Right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So this is one of those love projects which actually started off, and this is sometimes why I love sort of the way our teams operate is really unique to me, because this idea for the day and night indication of the little golden sphere that's half black and half golden that rotates once every 24 hours, it came from one of our youngest watchmakers, from an Action apprentice, who came up with a basic concept for this watch. We've taken that on board, and while it is a simple complication, it is a visually really stunning effect. So that day and night indication, it just means you can basically see through the entire watch. You've got that little sphere, a little ball visible from the front and back, your beautifully gold decorated hammer-on movement there in the caliber 82, and then a tourbillon, a flying tourbillon 6 o'clock with tourbillon stop, that diamond shell technology. And in the end, again, to what you're talking about in terms of instrument watches, you have something which is so classic, so richly decorated in its finishing, but yet has a very, very pure and instrument sort of effect when you wear it on your wrist. And that combination is just, for me, a perfect balance in what a Portuguese or complicated Portuguese should represent.
It's really cool to me, and I have to say, this tourbillon, If you were potentially a more marketing-driven brand, you would be talking about this all the time,
Yeah.
right? It is one of the coolest tourbillons around because it's a flying tourbillon and it's a stop-second tourbillon, as you were mentioning. Yeah. And part of the way that works so well is that you have a kind of a reconstruction of a tourbillon cage where you've got two pillars on either side, and then you've got these flexible arms that no matter what the angle of the pillars of the tourbillon, they're able to come around and stop the balance. And I think it's just, again, like wonderful innovation, really pragmatic, really brilliant from the perspective of IWC. Which one's your favorite?
So I'm really, I mean, technically, no question, Eternal Calendar,
right,
all day of them. Then when it comes to the colorways, I'm actually, the first watch I fell in love with in this collection is the Horizon Blue Perpetual Calendar in white gold. Because really that effect of combining that fresh color and the ice blue with the classic layout of a Portuguese Perpetual Calendar, for me, is just the perfect balance. What I love about a watch like this, it's a watch. You are never inappropriately dressed with a Portuguese Perpetual Calendar. There is no situation possibly in your life where you think, oh, I can't wear this watch doing that. And this is why the Portuguese Perpetual Calendar is so special to me. And for me, being a sort of a sporty person, that freshness that comes from the Horizon Blue absolutely struck me. This is my number 2. You hold it in your hands.
I like the Dune.
It's the Dune. Again, I think the graphic contrast, if we're not under LED mapping and under projection
the
mapping.
close-ups we will show you will not have LED mapping on there. Yes.
You have a very, very subtle yet very deep finish on that champagne dune color.
Yeah.
But then the print really gives it so much definition, but in a very subtle way, that for me that is one of the best balanced dials that I've seen from us in a long, long time.
Yeah, so I like that because I love the warmth of this. I love the champagne color dial. I love the contrast with the 5-band rose gold. Applied indexes and hands.
Yeah.
I think it's a watch that it's super timeless. And actually, I think that's the last thing we should end on.
Yeah.
The Portuguese really should be a watch that is unto a category of its own, right? Because it is, I mean, you look at it, it's on a leather strap, or I guess you now have versions on bracelets and also on rubber straps as well. It's a dress watch. It has complications as well, but it is honestly a watch that you can wear anywhere and with anything, you know. And even in Singapore, where we live in a rather warm and humid country, I see people wearing Portugueses all the time, like in shorts, you know, on the weekend, and it looks perfect. And I think that the ruggedness, the robustness, the pragmatism, and the kind of heroic story of the watch, or the underpinnings, really make it special in that regard. You know?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you're right. It's one, as we said, it's one of those watches that strikes that balance between a sporty modernity and still being dressy for any occasion. And I always think, you know, even back in the day when Tom Brady visited the White House, you know, of course that watch needs to be a Perpetual Calendar, because you are in that sphere there where it's kind of any occasion in your life that's asking for a serious watch. There you go. You know, and it has a generational quality that I think is very unique to the Portuguese.
Absolutely.
But yeah, Singapore, this is the only climate that I come across in my travels that is a challenge every single time I come.
Dude, I lived in it, and it's a challenge every single time for me as well.
I mean, I can remember last time I came, you know, just going for that morning run again, and after about 10K thinking, I actually feel destroyed, and I'm actually really lightheaded, and I think I'm going to faint and collapse.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I ran 10K in Singapore. Unique. But then, like halfway through the day, you're just like, I think I might have mild heat stroke actually.
Well, the other really embarrassing thing is obviously then you go to your air-conditioned hotel room, you take a shower, you get dressed, you come downstairs, and then it creeps up on you. After about 10 minutes, you think like, oh my God, I think I'm going to melt.
Yes.
And then you feel
start sweating all over again.
Of your body opening, and you go, I cannot believe this is happening.
But on that note, regardless of what your internal temperature is, you could wear a Portuguese and you'd still look cool.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Wade.
Pleasure.
Lovely to see you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.